Hi, I'm Angela Udongo, and I'm interviewing the East Co-Director of 127 Group, Brian Brown. Thank you so much for being here
Absolutely.
today.
Good to be here with you.
So, if you mind, could you just start off by telling us a little bit about your business and a little background for it too?
Yeah, what I do is I build and rebuild leaders. I actually strengthen companies and organizations and communities by helping build and rebuild leaders. I specialize in walking alongside leaders that are about my age. They've built, I'm 52, and most men or women have built a company, built an empire, or built a brand, but something in them they weren't finding joy. And so they usually have invested all their life building something, but then they've gotten to a place where they have no passion, they have no joy, and so they step off into something that they think is going to bring that to them, but then it usually brings their collapse. And so they're usually stepped off into something that's causing destruction for them and their family, and then it's causing a lack of engagement in their company, and usually they're influential enough that's also they tend to be very philanthropic into their community, so it's also hurting their community.
Right.
And so part of what I do is if a leader's not healthy, the organization isn't healthy, and we're not doing anything to improve the social fabric of the community.
Right.
And so up until this past June, I had my own consulting company called Sterizo, which means strengthen in Greek. But I was recently acquired by a much larger company called the 127 Group.
Okay. And you said you strengthen leaders. How do you find these people, these leaders, to strengthen in leaders community? And so, how do you go about?
One, if it's a fallen leader, you don't go looking for me on the web. There's not something. There's no social media. Usually, it has to be a relationship of trust. And so usually there's a handshake. Either they know me somehow, or there's a close personal friend that knows me that then there's some level of a handshake or trust. And so that's typically how almost everything that I do is relational marketing because of at least on the rebuilding side. Because most people, I have to live in somewhat of in obscurity, because if people know that I rebuild leaders, then they're like, oh wow, or leaders with Brian, something's wrong in his life. And so I had to get okay with living in some sort of obscurity for that. That trauma side of rebuilding leaders drives me to a preventative side to invest in young leaders. And so I do leadership development with companies. I do it with sports teams. I do specifically behavior that affects performance. And so I have contracts. I actually have a contract with Florida State with some of their teams and walking alongside and leaders. And then also nonprofit organizations also.
Right. That's good. How'd you get to this place right here? Like, you seem so established. What was your journey to get here?
I started off, I guess, through athletics. Athletics taught me a lot. I played most sports when I was younger, but then I kind of fell into a niche of being a volleyball. And I played volleyball up until my last U.S. Open was 1995. One of the reasons I work with athletes all the time is that at some point the lights are going to go off and the game's not going to be there. So part of my deal is using the game to prepare you for life instead of letting the game use you. And so, because there's a point where I think all of us who are athletes get our identity from that, and instead of seeing it as an opportunity to grow in your character and things. And so I went for a while. I was in the corporate world, stepped out of there and was a regional director for the American Cancer Society. Had significant territory. Then had a life crisis that actually brought me to a real faith, and then I went into ministry for about 20 years. And so I've dealt with helping people recover for a long time.
Oh, okay. And through that journey, what would you say the biggest obstacle you had to face going through that journey would be?
Myself.
Oh.
I think there's always that self-leadership is probably the toughest thing to do, and knowing first of all what you don't know, having the humility to learn from others, learning to have integrity, that what you see is what you get, and then ultimately learning to be a giver instead of a taker. And I think that through all of that, I think that's been
Yes.
the biggest obstacle is just is yourself.
That's true. So take us through a typical workday of Brian Brown.
Well, this morning I was writing curriculum, so I do leadership development and helping organizations, and so part of that is writing a guide or curriculum to take people through. So I spent the morning doing that. Got up here to the university, met with 3 captains of one of the athletic teams. We spent a good amount of time going through self-awareness. We actually took some surveys on some different things as a team, and then we were going through those results so that perception in leadership is often your reality and how other people perceive you, and so we're dealing with the captains on owning what they didn't bring. Here's how the team perceives you. How did that equal how you saw yourself? Meeting with some coaches after, just giving counsel to them on some decisions and some directions that they need to make. Day spending phone calls with different leaders, just allowing them to here's what I'm struggling with, what do you think, and giving guidance.
Interesting. It's a lot of interactions.
Lots.
Do you ever interact? Well, you said that you don't reach out to your customers through social media. But do you ever incorporate social media into running?
Not very much, especially with what I do. It's pretty much hands-on relationships and things. I think that's also one of those things that, at least in our culture, our identity sometimes comes from how many people know us instead of really who we are.
That's very interesting. So what are the different positions in the company? Besides, you're obviously a great speaker, you help people, you interact with people every day, but what are the other positions that people are in this company?
Our company is pretty diverse. The company that acquired me is actually about $100 million a year general construction company. But we also know that the margins in the construction industry and things are, it's very hard to find good talent. We live in a culture that doesn't value craftsmanship, and we don't value, it's just very hard to find talent these days, at least in that realm. So we've been in it for quite some time, and so the consulting realm is a door that's opened up for us, not only to consult on construction, which I don't do, but I do leadership and teamings, and then our clients, we come alongside of them and help their companies and things. So it can be entry-level positions of electricians to project managers to estimators to we're looking at in the consulting realm, where most of us are in our 50s, and so we have some wisdom of walking the road, but we're also looking to who's going to fill our shoes, who's going to succeed us. So we're looking for the 35-year-olds that can come kind of maybe apprentice underneath us, and that kind of thing.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's how you hire your potential employees, just by looking for their trades and seeing if they can fill your shoes.
Yes, and we do that through through relationships. We also do staffing solutions for nonprofits, and so just learning what actually, how do you do a good job match, and how do we know? And I don't think any of us are good at it.
Yeah.
Google will tell you they have more candidates than anybody. And they're not good at it. So.
Okay. So, if you can go back and change one thing about this whole journey, what do you think it would be?
I really don't think of much except for one thing. When I was younger, I had destination disease. I just wanted to get there. And now at this season of my life, you realize that there was a purpose for every leg of the journey, and that there was some wisdom acquired through everything, mainly through the failures. That's really when we start to change. It wasn't through our successes and stuff. And so you start to get to this point in your life, and you look back and you realize, okay, that particular period, if I will allow it, has a purpose to bring about good in others and things, and to provide people hope.
That's interesting. Okay, so final question.
Okay.
It's so great, but what, like, you give advice, but what's any last minute advice you have for anyone interested in pursuing a career in entrepreneurship?
Be patient. Just learn. I think there's so much stress on you as a younger generation that we say that stress is unmet expectations, and there's so much expectations that either are external or internal that are that keep you paralyzed in things. I tell a younger generation all the time, if you'll just change one word about every decade, you can remove a lot of stress. Because your value it's a little different than being an entrepreneur, but you're going to have to learn some skills. So when you first leave the university and you go into the private sector, your value to an organization is what you do. And you'll get very frustrated because the person above you will think isn't working as hard as you are, and they're getting paid more money, but you're having a misunderstanding of their value to the organization. Their value to the organization isn't what they do, it's what they know. But you have to put in about a decade of practice to get to that point where you have some knowledge base. But then what happens is you get there, and then the person above you, they're never around. They don't even know what you do any longer. And you get really frustrated, but you're missing the point that their value to the organization isn't what they do or what they know, it's who they know. And it's leveraging those relationships. And so to make it through those 30 years, you need to be okay with who you are. And I think we've missed that. The thing about an entrepreneur is you want it quickly, and anything that rises up quickly usually can't sustain itself.
Okay, well, that's all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much, Mr. Brown, for joining us.
It was helpful.
Yes, it was. Thank you.